Trenbolone, the nectar of the gods, divorce in a bottle, the Trenbolone sandwich, a 30-day Tren challenge. Need I go on? There's not a single human study available for us to review, and yet everybody out there wants to run Trenbolone on every cycle because it's safe and effective. Simple as that. And by the way, with safe and effective, I actually mean highly inflammatory, tremendous oxidative stress, and potentially carcinogenic. So now that I got your attention, let's get this spectacle on the road, shall we? Vigorous Steve here. Are you ready for a 1 hour long or longer deep dive into the Trenbolone Toblerone? You thought the Halo Testing deep dive was great? Grab your popcorn for this one, because this deep dive is even better, as we reviewed all of the available scientific literature on Trenbolone, so you don't have to. And as always, full citations are down below. Unlike Mastrone or Parabolan, there's actually a lot of studies performed on Trenbolone, but it's mostly investigated as a growth promoter and to improve feed efficiency in cattle, namely cows, pigs, sheep, and turkey. And it's also heavily investigated as an environmental pollutant and endocrine disruptor to the wildlife surrounding these cattle ranches where Trenbolone and estradiol implants are used. Unfortunately, human clinical trials or other human studies are nowhere to be found. There's a couple case reports and metabolite screening studies for the sake of drug testing competitive athletes. I might have found a single citation that indicates an actual human study in the Experimental Handbook of Pharmacology, Volume 43, Anabolic Androgenic Steroids by Charles D. Koch-Kean, but that citation doesn't lead anywhere either. The title of this citation translates to The Action of Trenbolone in Malnutrition, Cirrhosis, and Osteoporosis, study based on 31 cases. And if you go down to Table 2, they index the results of this uncontrolled clinical trial investigating patients with cirrhosis or other chronic liver diseases, and they mentioned that Trenbolone treatment lasted 2 months. The authors of the study reported therapeutic effects. If you happen to have this study, link it down below. I looked far and wide, hard and deep, basically through all the search parameters, couldn't find it anywhere. This is probably the only study in existence that's referenced anywhere in the scientific literature on human subjects. And maybe it's because Parabolan was voluntarily discontinued by Negma Pharmaceuticals in 1997, and they never published their findings publicly for the world to see. So if you happen to know anybody working at Negma Pharmaceuticals, or you're residing in France and you can give them a call, ask them to open up their vaults with all of the human clinical trials, all the scientific literature performed on humans using Trenbolone hexahydrobenzocarbonate or Trenbolone no ester. It doesn't really matter if it's in French, English, or another language. I can get it translated. Ask them to spill the beans on the Trenbolone sandwich so we can have it properly. Right? I'm always willing to make an addendum video with more unique information. I mean, at this point, I'm so desperate for human studies that I'm willing to offer you my cheeseburgers, man. Apparently, Dan DeShane was the first person to really talk about Trenbolone in the Underground Steroid Handbook Update newsletter, and he specifically mentioned that competitive bodybuilders should limit themselves to 2 ampules of Parabolan weekly. So that's a whopping total of 152 milligrams Trenbolone hexahydrobenzocarbonate, 100 milligrams net Trenbolone, discounting for the ester. And after years of bro science on the message boards claiming that more Trenbolone is definitely better, causing thousands of bodybuilders to increase their Trenbolone acetate dosages to 1,000 milligrams or even 1,400 milligrams weekly, we've now finally come full circle and understand that with Trenbolone, just like with Trestolone or dihydroboldenone, less is more. But I will say that the feed efficiency studies comparing the efficacy of high-dose implants versus regular dose implants, both containing Trenbolone acetate and estradiol, these studies show that cattle gain more mass with the high-dose implants. So if you want to go with the animal models, then more Trenbolone definitely is better. But don't get too excited when I say high-dose implants, because these implants last for months, and it literally translates to a few milligrams per day. After Trenbolone was discontinued in 1997, Dan DeShane wrote an article on how to extract Trenbolone acetate from the Phenoplex or Revelor tablets, which are being used as a growth promoter in cattle, but some of these pellets actually contained a then undisclosed amount of estradiol. And it's probably this estradiol which wasn't filtered out that contributed to the insane gains, but also the insane side effects that people commonly experienced while using these Trenbolone extracts back in the day. Later on, methods to filter the estradiol from the Trenbolone acetate became available, and bodybuilders were able to use Trenbolone without the estrogenic side effects, or gains for that matter. As underground labs became more available after Operation Raw Deal, Trenbolone acetate, enanthate, and hexahydrobenzocarbonate became readily available for bodybuilders to use. And nowadays, Trenbolone is literally everywhere, and everybody seems to have a love-hate relationship with it. Because in Trenbolone, you'll love the way you look, but you'll hate the way you feel. You'll hate yourself for hating everything else. Since Trenbolone acetate implants are so readily used as a growth promoter in cattle, there are some serious concerns that Trenbolone or some of its urinary metabolites are seeping into the groundwater, the soil, or might even potentially become airborne, and thus contaminate the surrounding wildlife. And there's actually a lot of studies that show that these compounds act as endocrine disruptors and alter mating behavior, as well as the development of sexual characteristics in young animals. I've grouped all of these studies down below. You can find them in citations. However, there appears to be no significant exposure toxicity to humans when consuming seafood stemming from areas that are contaminated with Trenbolone and Estradiol or some of their metabolites. Neither do Trenbolone acetate and estradiol-treated cows produce beef that have serious health complications for humans when consumed frequently, albeit that there are some studies that show that beef quality and overall marbling score isn't the same after solo Trenbolone acetate treatment. So that's probably what the estradiol is there for. The good news is that growth-promoting implants reduce the carbon footprint and overall ammonia emissions of the cattle industry, and therefore are good for the environment. Funded by the beef producers in California, United States of America. Okay, let's have a look at the medical insert for Parabolan and the veterinary inserts for Phenoplex and Revelor pellets. This time I was able to find all of them. Unfortunately, I could only find the first page of the Negma Parabolan insert, which I had translated by my former coaching client Noor from France a couple years back. Now, when you look at this picture, you can clearly see that on the other side of the medical insert, there's also text. Maybe there's a couple citations or references to actual human clinical trials or other human studies for us to do research with. So, if you happen to have access to the complete medical insert for Negma Pharmaceuticals Parabolan, please hook me up. Doesn't matter if it's in French, I'll have it translated by Noor, my former client, and make an addendum video for you guys as usual. And as you can clearly see, Negma Parabolan 76 milligrams per 1.5 milliliters Trenbolone hexahydrobenzocarbonate yields exactly 50 milligrams net Trenbolone per single ampule. But it also contained 5% benzyl alcohol and 3% ethyl alcohol as a preservative, and it was compounded in arachi's oil. Now, unfortunately, for a lot of people out there, arachi's oil can be highly inflammatory. So if you haven't watched the Carrier Oil Deep Dive video yet, now is a good time to do so. I'll link it at the end of this video. And these are the translated medical applications for Parabolan, prescribed in cases of cachexia and states of undernutrition in the elderly, in which case 76 milligrams Parabolan was administered intramuscularly every 15 days for 1 month. So that's 3 administrations at the start of the month, middle of the month, and at the end of the month. After which they continued with a single ampule of Parabolan, 76 milligrams, intramuscularly monthly for another 3 injections. So that's a total of 6 injections over a 4-month period, a whopping total of 456 milligrams Trenbolone hexahydrobenzocarbonate over 4 months, or 300 milligrams net Trenbolone over 4 months. And following major surgery, extensive burns or bed sores, and senile or glucocorticoid-induced osteoporosis, the treatment protocol is exactly the same. Now, if you break these dosages down, that would be between 2.5 to 5.1 milligrams Parabolan per day, or 17.7 to 35.5 milligrams weekly. No bodybuilder is going to get out of bed for these kinds of dosages, but obviously if you suffer from cachexia, extensive burns or bed sores, or just had surgery, you're probably not getting out of bed anytime soon. Since Negma Parabolan is no longer available on the market, and every Trenbolone product out there is either coming from underground labs or made by homebrew, there's basically no true medical inserts available anymore. But I also looked for the veterinary applications and found the inserts from Merck, Animal Health, Phenoplex H, and various Revelor products. I've linked all of them directly down below. So for Phenoplex H, the veterinary applications are to increase feed efficiency in feedlot heifers. Heifers are young female cows that haven't borne a calf yet. And the dosage is 200 milligrams Trenbolone acetate in a single implant containing 10 pellets, subcutaneously into the posterior aspect of the ear, so that's somewhere here. A 200 milligrams Trenbolone acetate slow-release delivery system implantation into a single administration lasting approximately 63 days or 9 weeks in total. That means that each heifer had about 22.2 milligrams Trenbolone acetate weekly, and for a 1,000-pound animal, give or take, that isn't very much. Which is weird because humans like to run 50 milligrams Trenbolone acetate weekly up to 150 milligrams daily. Oh, and it clearly says it here in the box that Phenoplex H isn't meant for humans. Okay. And these are the veterinary applications for Revelor 200, Revelor H, Revelor G, Revelor S, Revelor IH, Revelor IS, Revelor XH, and Revelor XS, containing Trenbolone acetate and estradiol in various concentrations. This was administered to increase feed efficiency in feedlot or pasture grazing, beef steers, and heifers. Steers are young castrated male cows. They were administered between 40 milligrams to 200 milligrams Trenbolone acetate in combination with 8 milligrams to 40 milligrams estradiol in a single implant consisting of 2 to 10 pellets, again subcutaneously into the posterior aspect of the ear. And depending on the kinds of cattle and the Revelor formulations, they might be implanted up to 200 days before slaughter, even though that's not always specified. So even at the highest dose of 200 milligrams Trenbolone acetate found in Revelor 200, XH, and XS, that would mean that steers or heifers get 1 milligram Trenbolone acetate per day or 7 milligrams weekly. And based on the highest dose of estradiol, that would be 0.2 milligrams daily or 1.4 milligrams weekly, assuming that these implants even last that long all the way up until slaughter. As a comparison, even though it probably doesn't translate well from humans to animals or vice versa for that matter, in the human ment implantation studies, which contained between 112 milligrams to 140 milligrams Trenbolone acetate per implant, human patients received between 1 to 4 implants per administration lasting anywhere between 6 months to 12 months, so it's not unrealistic to assume that Revelor formulations last up to 200 days, which is about 6.5 months in total. And Kings be forewarned that Revelor, any formulation behind it, is also not for humans to use. If you search on PubMed or any other scientific publication website, you get close to 900 search results for Trenbolone or some of its synonyms. 260 of those studies are actually about L-Trenogest, also known as allyl Trenbolone, which is widely used as a veterinary medication to suppress or synchronize estrus in horses or pigs. So the allyl Trenbolone we're going to forgo in this scientific review video, just like we're foregoing check drops, which is prescribed to suppress or synchronize estrus in female dogs, aka bitches. But that does mean that I did go through all remaining 600 studies about Trenbolone, which is like 99% animal models or in vitro studies, but there's a couple human case reports and metabolite screening studies, which we'll get into a little bit later in this video. So get ready for a laundry list, a boatload of evidence-based unique characteristics about Trenbolone and its various esters. Again, take it all with a grain of salt because animal models in vitro studies don't always translate 100% to human subjects, as we see many a time in the fitness industry of humans using Trenbolone themselves. Now, I want to highlight one study before we get into the unique characteristics, because this one made me laugh out loud in the real world. This study was performed by Zhao et al., published on February 1st, 2023, so it's a little bit over a year old, with an unpronounceable title, but I'm still going to try. European-based metal organic framework with acid-base buffer structure as electrochemiluminescence luminophore for hyperstatic Trenbolone trace monitoring under wide pH range. Guess how many times I had to re-record this segment, right? Post your numbers down below. Get the algorithm going. This study looked into ultrasensitive detection methods for Trenbolone, but unfortunately the full publication isn't available, so I wasn't able to include the potential detection times in days into the detection time segment of this video. But in the introduction, they mentioned something very peculiar, and I quote, "In addition, the constructed ECL biosensor via EU BDPO as a luminophore can realize sensitive trace detection for Trenbolone, which is a new steroid estrogen that affects the human endocrine and reproductive system to trigger testicular cancer or bisexual individuals." Let that sink in a little bit. And I'm not sure if that's a translation error or a full explanation of why Conor McTrenor started flirting with other dudes over at X Twitter after he took himself out of the USADA testing pool to recover from the broken leg and to act in Roadhouse, where he ended up pretty saucy but also pretty horny. So basically, on Trenbolone, you gotta bang pre-op ladyboys, otherwise you get testicular cancer. And it kind of explains why so many guys coming to Thailand taking Trenbolone acetate make the trip, the pilgrimage to Pattaya, visit Beach Road Soy 61 and start patrolling that area where the ladyboys are aplenty. Anyway, let's get into those evidence-based unique characteristics, shall we? Like I mentioned earlier in this video, Trenbolone is classified as an environmental endocrine disruptor, and it alters reproductive behavior, impairs the immune system, and even causes birth defects. It alters sexual differentiation, induces ovotestes formation, or even complete sex reversal. Again, that's in younger animals. It increases feed efficiency when combined with estradiol, growth hormone, oxytocin, zinc, clenbuterol, roctopamine, zilpaterol in cattle. This is all stemming from animal models and in vitro studies, and it could come from the upregulation of androgen receptors, increase of androgen-mediated gene transcription, glucocorticoid receptor inhibition and downregulation, non-genomic effects of Trenbolone in combination with estradiol, myostatin inhibition, increased IGF-1 production, increased satellite cell activity, proliferation, differentiation, and fusion, decreased protein degradation, beta-adrenergic receptor activation, increased lipolysis, and anabolism. And these effects are attenuated by vitamin D supplementation, which decreases food intake. So as long as you can eat, I don't think that vitamin D3 is going to hinder your gains while taking the Trenbolone sandwich. But flaxseed lignans cause androgen receptor and IGF-1 downregulation. So I would abstain from flax seeds if you care about utmost, highest feed efficiency and overall gains while supplementing. Well, you don't really supplement, but while taking Trenbolone. Now, we'll dive a little bit deeper into these individual anabolic effects a little bit later on, because this is ultimately what we're after. Keep in mind that everything basically in this video is stemming from animal models, but since we do see feed efficiency and overall anabolism increasing, improving in human subjects, I would say that a good amount of this evidence does translate into human subjects as well. Trenbolone increases oxytocin secretion when combined with estradiol. This increases IGF-1 production and increases steroid hormone-stimulated satellite cell proliferation and differentiation. So you can combine Trenbolone with oxytocin for an overall anabolic effect. But if you combine Trenbolone with, let's say, top of the reference range estradiol levels, then you get additional oxytocin secretion, which has an overlapping anabolic effect. All right, food for thought here. Trenbolone regulates putrescine, spermidine, and spermine polyamines biosynthesis by increasing ornithine decarboxylase and S-adenosyl methionine decarboxylase expression, which increases murine myoblast proliferation rates. Polyamines are naturally occurring amino acid derivatives that are important modulators of growth, cell proliferation, and cell differentiation. And you can even take spermidine as an over-the-counter supplement. Apparently, Trenbolone decreases protein synthesis in skeletal muscle. That doesn't sound good, but that's only in the absence of circulating testosterone and estradiol. It's a testosterone and estradiol that contribute to muscle protein synthesis heavily. So if you do go on the Trenbolone sandwich, make sure you have a testosterone base converting into estradiol downstream, and protein synthesis should stay sustained, and depending on your testosterone concentrations, might be severely upregulated. But there is good news. Trenbolone increases protein synthesis in fused satellite cells, making them nice and thick. And Trenbolone also decreases the breakdown of amino acids in skeletal muscle as well as in the liver, which has anti-catabolic glucocorticoid receptor inhibition and reduced liver tyrosine aminotransferase activity, reducing the breakdown of amino acids. So even if a protein synthesis is slightly decreased, assuming that there's no testosterone and estradiol in the picture, which as a human subject you should certainly have, the decrease in breakdown of amino acids results in a net accrual of amino acids, increasing nitrogen retention and ultimately resulting in increased muscle mass, even if you were to take Trenbolone acetate solo. Trenbolone, like so many other steroids, reduce thyroxine and thyroid binding globulin levels, which can result in hypothyroidism, a reduction of 45% in serum, which increases growth and feed efficiency, so that's a beneficial effect. But reduced thyroxine and thyroid binding globulin levels can also increase prolactin levels and ultimately cause issues with your libido. Again, this is all stemming from animal models. I'm not entirely sure if any of these animals were administered with iodine to sustain thyroxine production and levels overall, or selenium to help with the conversion of T4 into T3, making it biologically active, right? That I couldn't piece together from the scientific literature. So if you do use Trenbolone, keep in mind that these thyroid parameters might be altered, and you might need to supplement it with T4 or T3 if you were to undergo a fat loss phase while using Trenbolone. Trenbolone increases bone mineralization. It suppresses cancellous bone turnover in estradiol insufficient states. So imagine if you have sufficient estradiol, top of the reference range, or slightly superphysiological, that would be bone mineralization galore. Trenbolone protects against visceral fat accumulation, resulting in reduced hypertriglyceridemia, hyperinsulinemia, and myocardial damage. Trenbolone induces lipolysis from adipose tissue. This is the release of fat from body fat stores. This effect is coming from strong androgen receptor activation, moderate glucocorticoid receptor inhibition, and reduced adipogenic activity. Trenbolone also inhibits lipogenesis in adipose tissue. This is the formation of body fat, but in both instances, this is only in the absence of circulating estradiol. So to bring it all down, right, to digest this for the audience. When estradiol is high, it means that you get an overall anabolic effect through multiple different pathways. But when estradiol is under control or severely diminished, this promotes fat loss overall, right? Food for thought. Trenbolone downregulates brain aromatase enzymes and upregulates gonadal aromatase enzymes, but that's only in female fish, not in male fish. Again, food for thought. Trenbolone decanoate impairs memory function, but it's also valid for testosterone decanoate or nandrolone decanoate ester formulations, but we'll address this in a separate video discussing brain health in the context of anabolic androgenic steroid, where I pull all of the data together for us to enjoy and review and maybe deter us from steroid use forever. Trenbolone shows a dose-dependent inhibition of human serum peroxynase 1 enzymes, which increases oxidative stress to high-density lipoprotein, low-density lipoprotein, and the macrophages that would break down these lipoproteins, which increases atherosclerotic potential of lipids, which is a little bit worrying, but I'm sure it's the same case for all of the other steroids out there, albeit that it hasn't really been investigated in this context. Human peroxynase 1 enzymes are critical to neutralize free oxygen radicals, inactivate the formation of oxidized phospholipids in oxidized low-density lipoproteins, and to neutralize the effects of androgenic lipid peroxidases. The PON1 gene is expressed by peroxisome proliferator activated receptor gamma activation, which then increases the synthesis and release of peroxynase 1 enzymes from the liver, reducing atherosclerosis. Cancer issues aside, you might be able to offset these negative suppressive effects of Trenbolone with cardarine or another PPR gamma agonist. And don't forget your ezetimibe, for sake, to lower your low-density lipoprotein levels, which are basically a building block for plaque buildup when LDL is oxidized and turned into foam cells by macrophages, right? Please do your blood work while taking Trenbolone, because all of these things will overlap and compound the longer you take the Trenbolone sandwich. Trenbolone disrupts the circadian rhythm, which causes altered sleep-wake related behaviors. It increases the stress to light stimulation, but it might also cause systemic metabolic disorders. And Trenbolone also increases amyloid beta 42 concentrations in the brain, potentially contributing to Alzheimer's disease formation and progression through the buildup of amyloid beta plaque. Now, both of these conditions might be minimized or attenuated by melatonin supplementation, but we'll get into that a little bit later on when we get to the neurotoxicity segment of this video. Trenbolone potentially depletes glutathione stores stemming from in vitro studies. Monooxynase enzymes generate reactive Trenbolone metabolites, which might be genotoxic, and it increases glutathione S-transferase activity. So if you take the Trenbolone sandwich, some N-acetylcysteine or injectable glutathione might be a wise idea. Trenbolone offers strong anti-influenza A virus activities through an unknown mechanism. I'm sure you guys heard it many a times anecdotally that on Trenbolone, I wasn't able to get sick with a common cold, influenza, the flu. Maybe it won't work for the flurona, but for the flu, it might be a viable option to get better faster, right? It's stemming from an in vitro study, so take it all with a grain of salt. Trenbolone induces micronuclei formation in hamster fibroblast lung V79 cells. In these cells, Trenbolone has a cytotoxic, but also genotoxic effect, resulting in broken chromosome fragments after cell division. And Trenbolone potentially has carcinogenic effects to Syrian hamster embryo fibroblast cell lines. It neoplastically transformed the She cells, also causes micronuclei formation, and increased these genes which are related to cancer as well. Now, this has a weaker transforming activity compared to testosterone. Again, both studies are in vitro studies, so take it all with a grain of salt. But these are early signs that Trenbolone or some of its metabolites have potential carcinogenic activity, resulting in mutations during increased cell proliferation and division. But these effects were not observed in C3H mouse embryo fibroblast cells. Similar studies contest these results, though, and say that the mutagenic effects of Trenbolone were caused by impurities of the Trenbolone used during the AMOS tests. I can't say that any of these studies are very conclusive, whether Trenbolone is cytotoxic, genotoxic, or carcinogenic overall. I've linked all of these studies down below in the genotoxicity segment of the citations, so you can form your own opinion if you're interested in doing all of the research yourself. And that being said, we don't see any of the Revelar S-implanted cattle, or the tren-abusing bodybuilders for that matter, die from cancers caused by Trenbolone. Cattle die prematurely by going to the slaughterhouse, and bodybuilders die prematurely from heart attacks or blood clots well before cancers could potentially form. Hey, wait a minute. And this unique characteristic kind of confirms this. Trenbolone has dose-dependent proliferative effects on human prostate cancer 22RV1 cell lines, which is mediated through the androgen receptor with similar activity as dihydrotestosterone. So make sure you don't have any pre-existing prostate cancer present. Do your cancer marker screening, right? You have your prostate-specific antigen, whether that's total or free. Get yourself diagnosed, maybe do an ultrasound from the front, not from the back. That's not required anymore. You don't need the finger assessment. Those days are over. Just to make sure that pre-existing prostate cancer doesn't get any worse while on the Trenbolone sandwich. And now we finally get to the good parts. Trenbolone reduces myostatin or prevents myostatin elevation when combined with estradiol. Without the estradiol, myostatin levels might increase by 200%, but we already addressed this in the myostatin video. I'll link it at the end of this one. Trenbolone shows a dose-dependent increase in autocrine within skeletal muscle and the liver insulin-like growth factor 1 production, which is then further enhanced when combined with estradiol. Some of these studies show when they took bovine satellite cells through biopsy that IGF-1 levels didn't really improve or increase. But of course, these beef are not training, and we all know that training also increases autocrine within skeletal muscle, IGF-1 production, and secretion into the surrounding tissue. So if you want elevated IGF-1 levels while taking Trenbolone, make sure that you go to the gym. And while training also reduces myostatin levels and increases androgen receptor content of skeletal muscle, so while you're still here, go inject your Trenbolone acetate and head to the gym already. Trenbolone's double bond at the steroid nucleus reduces its receptor specificity, and thus Trenbolone or some of its metabolites not only activate the androgen receptor, the estrogen receptors, and the progesterone receptors, but also block the glucocorticoid receptors as well as the mineralocorticoid receptors with various affinities. Trenbolone is a selective androgen receptor modulator at lower dosages, right? This is very important to understand. Just like SARMs, Trenbolone has SARM-like effects. This sustains muscle mass, sustains bone mineral density, but reduces prostate size. And this loses selectivity at higher dosages. We'll get into this when we start analyzing the Hershberger Bioassays and form our own anabolic to androgenic rating a little bit later in this video. Training or not, Trenbolone upregulates the androgen receptor content of skeletal muscle. This increases androgen receptor expression, increased cellular beta-catenin content, enhanced the beta-catenin androgen receptor complexes, and this activates the adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase, AMPK. But this effect is more pronounced at lower concentrations. More evidence that more Trenbolone might not be better, at least when it comes to androgen receptor content of skeletal muscle. The androgen receptor relative binding affinity of Trenbolone compared to testosterone is 190 to 197 or 348 depending on which study you interpret. Trenbolone's androgen receptor relative transcriptional activity compared to dihydrotestosterone is slightly higher at 110. Unfortunately, I couldn't find this compared to testosterone directly, but compared to DHT, it's, let's say, 10% more transcriptional activity. Trenbolone is a concentration-dependent progesterone receptor agonist. It has a relative binding affinity for the progesterone receptor compared to progesterone either between 50 to 75, 47 to 75, or 137, but that's only for bovine progesterone receptors. Let's interject with a study here. Even though we're not done with the evidence-based unique characteristics, I think it's time for a study overlay. This study was performed by Oyaso et al., published on November 1978, a little bit older than I am, titled Unique Steroid Congeners for Receptor Studies. In this study, they looked at the various relative binding affinities for various sex hormones and their derivatives for the estrogen, progesterone, androgen, mineralocorticoid, and glucocorticoid receptors. This study is a little bit hard to decipher, so allow me to guide you through it. In Table 3 of this study, the researchers list various testosterone derivatives. 17-beta-hydroxy-estra-4911-triene-3-one is Trenbolone. And then in Chart 1, they mention the grading of relative binding affinity for each testosterone derivative, compared to the parent hormone, which binds to the respective receptor with a binding affinity of 100, right? 100% being the parent hormone. Testosterone for the androgen receptor, estradiol for the estrogen receptors, and progesterone for the progesterone receptors, etc. In graph 6, you see the results for the testosterone derivatives. It appears that both testosterone B1 and dihydrotestosterone B2 have a relative binding affinity of 1 to 3 for the progesterone receptors compared to progesterone, and Trenbolone B8 and norgestreinone B14, which is found in birth control, have a relative binding affinity of 50 to 75 compared to progesterone. But other studies using calculation models say that Trenbolone's relative binding affinity for the progesterone receptor is 74 to 75. Testosterone B1 and DHT B2 have a relative binding affinity of 100 to 125 for the androgen receptors, and Trenbolone B8 has a relative binding affinity of 150 to 250 for the androgen receptors compared to testosterone. But again, other calculation models say that it's either 190 to 197 or 348. So let's go with the highest number and say that Trenbolone binds to the androgen receptor 3.5 times more than testosterone, right? Fingers crossed this actually plays out in the real world. And in this graph, you see that testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, and Trenbolone have undetectable affinity for the estrogen receptors, albeit that another study, which we'll discuss a little bit later, does show that Trenbolone has some level of affinity for the estrogen receptors. And you can also see that Trenbolone has weak relative binding affinity for the mineralocorticoid and glucocorticoid receptors at 1 to 3 compared to aldosterone and dexamethasone, which isn't exactly cortisol, but later studies confirmed that these findings are correct. Also more on this later. And I know it's a bit hard to read and decipher, but if you need more time with these studies and compare these results to the calculated relative binding affinities, all you have to do is follow the citations down below. Trenbolone is a concentration-dependent estrogen receptor agonist. It has a relative binding affinity for the estrogen alpha receptors when compared to the standard being estradiol of 100, of only 0.183 or 0.2% when compared to estradiol. And Trenbolone has a relative transcriptional activity through the estrogen receptors compared to estradiol of 0.0023. So I would say that that's negligible compared to circulating estradiol levels within the body. Now, Trenbolone has low affinity for the estrogen receptors even at higher concentrations. So if you want to potentiate some activity through the estrogen receptors, more Tren is not going to cut it. And a fun fact here is that Nandrolone has a relative binding affinity for the estrogen alpha receptors of 0.081. So Trenbolone binds twice as much as Nandrolone does, but Trenbolone only transcribes at 1/3 of Nandrolone, which has a estrogen receptor relative transcriptional activity of 0.0060. So let's use Trenbolone to mildly activate the estrogen receptors, and then use Trestellone or drostanolone to inhibit the estrogen receptors, or block estrogen-mediated gene transcription from occurring at all. Okay, got it. Trenbolone is a concentration-dependent glucocorticoid receptor inhibitor, but also a concentration-dependent mineralocorticoid receptor inhibitor. We just discussed this, so the details are on the screen. We'll discuss the anti-catabolic effects of Trenbolone a lot more in depth a little bit later in this video. Are you still with me? Wondering where all of the human studies are? Me too, buddy. Me too. The only available human study performed on Trenbolone was performed by Tim Pietkowski et al., titled "My Mind Pretty Much Went to Mush: A Qualitative Exploration of Trenbolone in the Performance and Image Enhancing Drug Community." This is basically the best study that we have on Trenbolone regarding the mental side effects in humans, and it was probably one of my all-time favorite studies to read and make a video about, which I already did. I'll link it at the end of this one in case you're interested. And Trenbolone induces, based on the case reports, psychosis, delusions, violence, murderous tendencies when combined with aromatizing compounds like testosterone or methendienone, also known as Dianabol. So we have, a couple human studies showing that your mind goes to mush and you turn into a murderous freak. Not very promising. And I tried my absolute best to find scientific evidence of how or why Trenbolone causes the infamous Tren Cough, but there honestly isn't much in scientific literature on this subject. This study mentioned what the entire enhanced bodybuilding community has always speculated, that Trenbolone acetate specifically increases inflammatory prostaglandins, which then causes bronchoconstriction and thus results in severe Tren Cough. And now you're on the floor gasping for air, wondering if you're ever going to do another Trenbolone acetate injection ever again, which is probably going to occur the next day anyway, because the results are so insane and the Tren Cough is 100% worth it. Now, there are a few studies that show that bioidentical hormones can significantly increase inflammatory prostaglandin release in various tissues, but that's mostly investigated in the context of the menstrual cycle or the female reproductive tract. But it's not unlikely, not unthinkable, that Trenbolone works in a similar fashion because it does potentiate some activity through the estrogen receptors. Prostaglandins have been shown to elicit an anabolic response in vitro studies. After all, arachidonic acid has been used to induce anabolism by increasing inflammation, and prostaglandins are lipids derived from arachidonic acid. High levels of prostaglandins can cause persistent hiccups, which many a Tren user and abuser can attest to, and these hiccups only go away when you discontinue the Trenbolone or put methods in place to reduce the production of these prostaglandins. Anti-inflammatory drugs can reduce prostaglandin production and levels in the body quite dramatically, but obviously aren't very sustainable. A diet rich in fiber, zinc, magnesium, bromelain digestive enzymes from pineapple, or anti-inflammatory herbs or spices like curcumin, for example, help to balance prostaglandin levels in the body and might be sufficient to offset this crippling Tren Cough that you might experience following Trenbolone acetate injections. All the more reason to eat healthy and stay away from refined processed foods. Avoiding foods that have a lot of arachidonic acid will also help, although you can synthesize arachidonic acid yourself from meat, poultry, eggs, fish, and dairy products. Maybe following a carnivore diet while running Trenbolone acetate isn't such a good idea after all. And daily subcutaneous microadministrations to minimize large influxes of Trenbolone acetate at any given time will also help. Or you can try Trenbolone enanthate or hexahydrobenzyl carbonate, because these esters have a much longer half-life if you still continue with daily subcutaneous microadministrations for the most stable serum concentrations. Anyway, this could be a whole separate video in itself, so let's continue with the foot-long Trenbolone sandwich and look at the case reports, shall we? And as always, all of these case reports are grouped in the citations down below. The subjects were adult men. Subject age was between 20 to 43 years old, a total sample size of 13 adult men. The reported dosages were 175 milligrams to 1400 milligrams weekly, but this was a combined dose of anabolic androgenic steroid over the week. And in many of the case reports, they don't really specifically mention how much Trenbolone was actually used. The reported duration of Trenbolone treatment alongside the other steroids or other performance-enhancing drugs was anywhere between 1 month up to 12 months, which is insane, even at lower dosages. Co-administration alongside Trenbolone acetate, enanthate, or hexahydrobenzyl carbonate was either 750 milligrams testosterone intramuscularly weekly, boldenone intramuscularly at unknown dosages, 20 milligrams Dianabol orally daily, stanozolol, winstrol orally at unknown dosages, turinabol intramuscularly, probably a spelling mistake, phosphatidylcholine subcutaneous, which helps with fat loss, fat mobilization from adipose tissue, clenbuterol, unknown dosages, 20 milligrams tadalafil Cialis daily, pretty high. You get a terrible stuffy nose from that. I think 5 to 10 milligrams, more than enough for third member gains. Or 20 milligrams Lexapro, which is an SSRI, daily. So that's a wide range of co-administration of drugs. And the reported complications are as follows. Acute psychosis, delirium, murder of girlfriend, like I mentioned earlier in the unique evidence-based characteristics. And in these instances, there was no family history or previously diagnosed mental illness. But let's continue. Myocardial infarction, acute kidney injury, cholestatic hepatitis resulting in jaundice, rhabdomyolysis, diagnosed with elevated creatine phosphokinase levels, creatine phosphokinase myocardial band, which is heart-specific, fever, vomiting, and muscle cramps, new onset diabetes, diagnosed by hyperglycemia, hypertension, increased blood pressure, injection depot infection, and don't look at that case report. Those pictures are absolutely brutal. And severe inflammatory acne, also very brutal pictures. But if you do want to watch them, you like a little bit of gore, follow the citations down below. Now, to be fair, in all of these case reports, there are no real overlapping conditions in multitude of different case reports like we saw with Superdrol, continuously causing liver toxicity issues. All right, so keep this in mind. Every case report is a unique instance of problematic conditions when using Trenbolone acetate, but since there's so many other co-administration drugs at the same time, you can't exactly pinpoint that Trenbolone acetate or another ester is the sole root cause of these complications. And regarding the negative effects of Trenbolone on the organs of the body, that's only been assessed in various animal models because, again, the human scientific evidence is basically non-existent, or at least not accessible. It does appear that Trenbolone exposure has a dose-dependent effect on kidney hypertrophy, a dose-dependent increasing effect on total cholesterol and low-density lipoprotein levels while reducing high-density lipoprotein and triglyceride levels. So that's, I would say, is a bonus that triglyceride levels do come down during Trenbolone exposure, albeit that some studies report that Phenoplex Trenbolone acetate implants have no negative effect or improving effect on serum lipid parameters. And while reviewing all of the available Hershberger Bioassays, it appears that Trenbolone doesn't cause any liver hypertrophy in some of these animal models, but in other models, it certainly does. All right, we'll get into that a little bit later on in this video. Let's move over to the neurotoxicity, which there are several studies showing that Trenbolone has, let's say, negative effects on brain health. I mean, Trenbolone's neurotoxicity is always a hot topic, since there are 3 case reports of adult men experiencing severe mental breakdown resulting in all kinds of issues and admittances, and not to mention the millions of raging sissy-fit temper tantrums that tren-abusing bodybuilders and strength athletes occasionally throw. When I say occasionally, I mean basically multiple times per day. I think it's only fair to spend some time on Trenbolone's negative effect on the brain, starting with the study performed by Ma et al., published on January 1st, 2015, titled 17-beta Trenbolone, an anabolic androgenic steroid as well as an environmental hormone, contributes to neurodegeneration. Scary title. In this study, the researchers investigated the effects of Trenbolone on the brain of rats to see if amyloid beta protein levels increased, like we earlier mentioned in the unique characteristics. Abnormal levels of this naturally occurring protein clump together in the brain to form plaques that can disrupt brain function. They administered Trenbolone without an ester, so that's a Tren base basically, at either 0.2 milligrams, 1 milligram, or 5 milligram per kilogram of body weight to male and female mice. And some of these mice were pregnant, so they can investigate the negative effects of Trenbolone on the fetal brain as well. Male rats had the highest concentration of Trenbolone in their brain. They also had the highest concentration of amyloid beta 42 in serum, as well as in the brain, 48 hours after Trenbolone administration. With prolonged exposure and frequent administrations, this persistent increase in amyloid beta 42 could form plaque and contribute to Alzheimer's disease. So maybe we should do a lazy man's Trenbolone acetate treatment protocol, just like lazy man's TRT with 1 injection per week, even though amyloid beta 42 levels in the brain and in serum increase over 48 hours and then slowly come down. If we do daily microadministrations, then obviously this just stays elevated and now you get Alzheimer's disease over time. But maybe with 1 administration per week, resulting in all kinds of terrible side effects and terrible serum fluctuations, maybe we can bypass this potential for Alzheimer's disease, right? What do you want? Stable serum concentrations or forgetting your own name later in life, right? I'll leave that entirely up to you. And here in the discussion, the researcher specifically mentioned that Trenbolone can cross the blood-brain barrier. Maybe that's the reason why everybody turned psycho while running Trenbolone. Trenbolone reached higher concentrations in the brain compared to skeletal muscle, and eventually it accumulates in the brain with frequent administrations multiple times per week, leading to serious consequences and complications down the road. Now, like I mentioned in the unique characteristics, there is some hope because the body naturally removes amyloid beta aggregation in the brain while sleeping. Melatonin is part of this process. Now, of course, we all know that Trenbolone kind of impairs sleep quality and perhaps melatonin secretion, so it would be in your best interest to supplement with melatonin before bed to help you fall asleep and stay asleep and clear off the amyloid beta that has been accumulating in your brain over the day and offset this terrible negative side effect that Trenbolone potentially has and save you from Alzheimer's disease later in life. And I believe that Alzheimer's disease and amyloid beta plaque studies already show that anywhere between 5 milligrams to 10 milligrams melatonin before bed is effective to remove amyloid beta from the brain. But you might need to go a little bit higher when you megadose Trenbolone during contest prep. 10 milligrams, 20 milligrams, up to 100 milligrams supplemental melatonin is not unheard of, especially when you combine Trenbolone acetate or any ester with stimulants to initiate fat loss, right? In order to get nasty shredded, Trenbolone dosages and stimulant use or fat burner use might be so high that you need a megadose of melatonin to offset this all entirely. Moving over to the next neurotoxicity study performed by Zelleroth et al., published on January 2019, titled Toxic Impact of Anabolic Androgenic Steroids on Primary Rat Cortical Cell Cultures. In this study, the researchers cultured glial and neuronal primary cortical cells extracted from rat fetuses and investigated the toxic effects of testosterone, stanozolol, winstrol, nandrolone, decadurabolin, and Trenbolone Parabolan at various concentrations in vitro, but this is all without the ester, right? Repeated administrations of testosterone, stanozolol, nandrolone, and Trenbolone reduced mitochondrial function and increased lactose dehydrogenase enzymes released from cultured cells, indicating cytotoxic effects. Testosterone, nandrolone, and Trenbolone, but not stanozolol, caused apoptotic cortical cell death by increasing caspase-3 and 7 activity in a concentration-dependent fashion. Caspase-3 controls DNA fragmentation and morphologic changes to apoptosis, whereas caspase-7 appears to be more important to the loss of cellular variability, which is the number of healthy cells. In the discussion, the researchers note that nandrolone appears to be the most neurotoxic anabolic androgenic steroid, followed by Trenbolone and then testosterone, probably because testosterone converts into estradiol, and estradiol has a neuroprotective effects. Knowing that the decanoate ester might also contribute to cognitive decline, I would suggest to avoid nandrolone decanoate, especially at higher dosages, if you care about your brain health and overall productivity. But if you want to YOLO hard and make phenomenal gains, then you can consider a cycle of testosterone, nandrolone, and Trenbolone for the ultimate brain cell apoptosis neurodegenerative stack. And the last neurotoxicity study that we're going to discuss was also performed by Zelleroth et al. This one was published on June 2021, so it's a little bit more recent, titled Structurally Different Anabolic Androgenic Steroids Reduce Neurite Outgrowth and Neuronal Viability in Primary Rat Cortical Cell Cultures. In this study by the same researchers, using a similar cell culture setup, it was shown that Trenbolone reduced the number of cortical neurons and had an adverse effect on neuronal cell viability. As shown in the previous study, Trenbolone reduced mitochondrial function and increases lactose dehydrogenase release of the treated cells. Trenbolone also decreased TUB3 gene expression, which may explain the reduction of neurite growth. Neurite length is important for neuronal development and neuronal communication. You can stimulate neurite growth with neurotropic factors. So besides melatonin to reduce amyloid beta levels in the brain, offsetting this potential for Alzheimer's disease, I would suggest you look into compounds like dihexa, Nupept, Salank, Samax, cerebrolysine, fluvoxamine, or vortioxetine to stimulate neurogenesis and offset these negative effects of Trenbolone. Right? I would suggest you to run cerebrolysine 5 milliliters to 10 milliliters following every cycle of Trenbolone that you took to kind of restore the neurites and the overall neurotoxicity that you just undertook in order to win a show or to get shredded for the beach. Now, of course, these last two studies have been performed on the cultured fetal brain cells of rats, so I'm not entirely sure how much of this data translates to a fully developed human brain, and how it even compares to alcohol, for example, which also isn't great for brain health. Still, it's something that you need to be aware of, and co-administration of melatonin or neurotropic compounds is probably advised. And that finally brings us to the skeletal muscle studies. Yay! But since the skeletal muscle and growth promoting studies are all stemming from animal models or in vitro studies using animal cells, I think it's best if we summarize all of these results like we would normally do with the human clinical trials, which in the case of Trenbolone are fully MIA. Trenbolone acetate appears to reduce the rate of muscle protein synthesis, but also reduces the rate of muscle protein breakdown, while simultaneously increasing nitrogen retention within the cells. It's speculated that this reduction in protein synthesis is stemming from Trenbolone's relatively high binding affinity for the androgen receptors, and thus testosterone's binding capacity for the androgen receptor is severely diminished. It's the testosterone and the estradiol that contribute to muscle protein synthesis after all, and even though Trenbolone can activate the estrogen alpha receptor in a very small amount, it's probably not sufficient to initiate muscle protein synthesis. Or is this because Trenbolone has a negative effect on the HPTA, or many of the animals investigated are castrated, they have low testosterone and low estradiol levels, and thus this muscle protein synthesis that's otherwise initiated by testosterone or estradiol is now gone because there's no circulating testosterone and estradiol. Maybe this is also another reason why Trenbolone acetate implants are usually combined with estradiol to stimulate muscle protein synthesis further. And you can somewhat confirm this with the Hershberger Bioassays, where castrated rodents treated with Trenbolone acetate see a reduction in body weight in a dose-dependent fashion, whereas with the cattle treated with Trenbolone acetate and estradiol implants see a steep increase in body weight. So that leads us to the following conclusion. If you go on the Trenbolone sandwich, make sure you have testosterone and sufficient circulating estradiol levels in the body for protein synthesis, which might be reduced within skeletal muscle during Trenbolone acetate treatment. Trenbolone's anticatabolic effects reducing muscle protein breakdown are stemming from mild to moderate glucocorticoid receptor inhibition, preventing cortisol from signaling for protein degradation. And Trenbolone also downregulates the glucocorticoid receptors and lower serum cortisol levels over time. Trenbolone almost completely suppresses tyrosine aminotransferase enzymes in the liver hepatocytes of rats, which is a key enzyme in amino acid degradation and gluconeogenesis, and this might explain why you sometimes get hypoglycemic while running Trenbolone. Based on the dosages investigated in the various animal models, the anticatabolic effects lie anywhere between 0.08 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight to 0.8 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight, either Trenbolone acetate or enanthate subcutaneously daily. And if you were to extrapolate this to the human equivalent dose using DoseCal, linked down below, a 100 kilogram human being would get between 1.3 milligrams to 13 milligrams Trenbolone acetate or enanthate daily, which is 9.1 milligrams to 91 milligrams weekly. So imagine just running 10 milligrams Trenbolone acetate per week to get anti-catabolic effects, right? Nobody gets out of bed for that, but you see that you don't need much. So now you understand why the Parabolan medical treatments were so low. A single ampule of 76 milligrams Trenbolone hexahydrobenzocarbonate, resulting in 50 milligrams net Trenbolone every 15 days, or 35.5 milligrams weekly, underweight, bedridden people with muscle-wasting diseases already see sufficient glucocorticoid receptor inhibition and muscle protein sparing effects at these very low yet effective dosages. Trenbolone-treated animals appear to have higher serum cortisol concentrations initially, probably due to glucocorticoid receptor inhibition or the stress from these implantations, which took place. But in long-term studies, it was shown that serum cortisol and corticosterone levels drop during Trenbolone treatment. Both testosterone and Trenbolone reduce glucocorticoid secretion from the adrenal glands. If you want to lower cortisol levels further, look into Imodin, which inhibits the 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1 enzymes, preventing the production of cortisol and corticosterone glucocorticoid steroids. And doing some dubious extrapolation by chronically reducing serum cortisol and corticosterone levels, Trenbolone might increase adrenocorticotropic hormones, which would otherwise signal for additional cortisol and corticosterone release from the adrenal glands, which is now suppressed from circulating Trenbolone and perhaps testosterone, if you have a testosterone base in the picture. So cortisol and corticosterone levels are low, but adrenocorticotropic levels go up. And guess what? Elevated adrenocorticotropic hormone levels can ultimately contribute to tanned skin. Adrenocorticotropic hormone consists of 39 amino acids. The first 13 can be cleaved off to form alpha melanocyte-stimulating hormone, which then stimulates melanogenesis by activating the melanocortin receptors 1, 3, 4, and 5. Melanocortin receptor 2 is exclusively reserved for adrenocorticotropic hormone. So whether it's cleaved or not, you get some melanogenesis through these melanocortin receptors 1 to 5. Melanotan 2 works on the exact same receptors as alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, ultimately resulting in a tanned skin. So whether you take melanotan 2 or not, there might be an overlapping effect. If you want to get matte tanned, a low dose of Trenbolone, sufficient enough to reduce cortisol levels but increase adrenocorticotropic hormone levels, in combination with melanotan 2, you should look pretty damn dark with sufficient sunlight exposure or going to the tanning salon, obviously. However, there's always a caveat, right? A single 10-day animal model showed that while serum corticosterone levels decreased by 45%, serum adrenocorticotropic hormone levels were not altered during Trenbolone treatment. But maybe this study wasn't performed long enough. Like I mentioned before, estradiol is a contributing factor to Trenbolone's growth-promoting effects. When Trenbolone acetate is administered to female animals, they grow significantly faster than male animals of the same species. But when male animals are co-administered with estradiol during Trenbolone acetate treatment, they also grow at an accelerated rate. And whether that's through alterations in muscle protein synthesis or an increase in growth hormone and insulin-like growth factor 1 production in the presence of circulating estradiol, that's not very clear. Combination implant studies show a clear significant increase in serum GH, IGF-1, and IGF-1 binding protein 3 in cattle, which is not correlated to food intake. So that means that even in a caloric-restrictive state, these combination implants will still increase GH, IGF-1, and IGF binding protein 3 levels, contributing to the overall anabolic effect alongside Trenbolone and estradiol. Now, this doesn't mean that you should bring your serum estradiol levels up to those of women right before ovulation, between 150 to 750 picograms per milliliter, not 150 picomoles per liter. That's totally fine for men. That's top of their reference range. That should contribute to sufficient growth hormone secretion and IGF-1 production in the liver, but over 150 picograms per milliliter, that surely results in gynecomastia and potentially issues with your blood pressure. In human men, serum growth hormone and IGF-1 levels don't really seem to improve beyond a serum estradiol concentration of, let's say, 75 to 80 picograms per milliliter anecdotally, which is already the range where most men start to notice issues with their libido or symptoms of gynecomastia. It might be more cosmetically appealing and cost-effective compared to gynecomastia surgery just to run exogenous growth hormone and IGF-1 LR3, for example, and keep your serum estradiol at, let's say, top of the reference range at most 60 picograms per milliliter, which seems to be reasonably benign when it comes to gynecomastia formation. And I do understand that in the scientific evidence that there's a clear correlation between serum estradiol and serum growth hormone and IGF-1 levels, but that's also highly age dependent. And if you really want to increase your GH and IGF-1 levels in serum, look into growth hormone secretagogues if you want to go with a cheaper option while keeping your estradiol somewhat at the top of the reference range, because supravisiological might still give you gyno, because growth hormone secretagogues are also known to additionally secrete prolactin from the pituitary gland. High estradiol and high prolactin is a recipe for gynecomastia in the presence of a progestogenic 19-nor testosterone derivative, in this case being Trenbolone. Several in vitro studies using animal muscle biopsy cell cultures show that Trenbolone acetate plus estradiol increase muscle satellite cell content, activate muscle satellite cell proliferation and differentiation, and increase satellite cell fusion rates with existing muscle fibers to provide myonuclei necessary to support further muscle growth. In most of these studies, but not all of them, intercellular IGF-1 messenger RNA expression is significantly increased, which likely contributes to satellite cell proliferation. Trenbolone acetate treatment itself also increases muscle satellite cell content and proliferation, which might be caused by non-genomic effects, meaning that Trenbolone doesn't activate the DNA transcribing into messenger RNA. These effects are not potentiated through the androgen receptor, but might involve the G protein coupled receptors, the matrix metalloproteinase 2, matrix metalloproteinase 9, heparin binding epidermal growth factor like growth factor, epidermal growth factor receptors, a receptor tyrosine protein kinase ERBB2, and the IGF-1 receptor. So there's a lot yet that still needs to be investigated regarding the complete effects of Trenbolone itself. Keep in mind that estradiol induces rapid phosphorylation, meaning activation, of the IGF-1 receptors through the estrogen alpha receptors, which is the exact same receptor that Trenbolone has minute trace binding affinity for, but these effects are not observed through the beta receptors, so that means that you won't get similar effects regarding phosphorylation of the IGF-1 receptors when you use ecdysterones or testosterone. Obviously, the transcriptional activity of the phosphorylated IGF-1 receptors is enhanced in the presence of circulating IGF-1. Basically, the addition of estradiol not only increases localized intercellular and autocrine IGF-1 levels, but also increases IGF-1 receptor activation and signaling, resulting in a pronounced prolific effect. Do you guys remember this video where I debunked the anabolic to androgenic rating that William Lebelin listed in the Anabolics books, where he said that the anabolic to androgenic rating of Trenbolone acetate, enanthate, or hexahydrobenzocarbonate was 500 each, when compared to Nandrolone acetate without a single reference to back up that statement? Turns out he wasn't that far off. But when you take the ester percentage and molecular weight into consideration, then you already see that this ratio starts to fall apart. Nandrolone's molecule is a little bit heavier when compared to Trenbolone. That means that you get less molecules of Nandrolone when injecting the exact same amount of milligrams of Trenbolone, discounting for the esters. And if you account for the difference in ester weight, then these ratios might have a discrepancy between 25.9% less to 27.8% more Nandrolone molecules compared to Trenbolone molecules, even if the milligram dosages were exactly the same. The details are on the screen, but let's dive a little bit deeper into all available Hershberger Bioassays, which I was able to piece together for Trenbolone acetate, enanthate, and Trenbolone no ester. So I did the absolute unthinkable, something that nobody in their right minds should ever do, but all of these megadosing Trenbolone cycles that I did in my late 20s have made me a little bit crazy, so I did it anyway. I indexed all available Hershberger Bioassays performed on Trenbolone since the early days, grouped weight changes of the levator ani plus bulbocavernosus muscles together with changes in total bone mineral density and hemoglobin concentrations under the desired anabolic effects when combined to testosterone and methyltestosterone, and weight changes of the ventral prostate, seminal vesicles plus coagulating gland, Cowper's gland, glans penis, preputial glands, pituitary gland, adrenals, epididymitis, kidneys and liver under the undesired androgenic effects, and the weight changes of the retroperitoneal fat pad within the abdomen as the lipolytic rating of Trenbolone. I spent a good 3 days on this, and I wouldn't have gotten this far without Dr. Dean St. Mart's contributions and insights. Thank you very much. If you want to do your own calculations, all of the available Hershberger Bioassays performed on Trenbolone are down below. All you have to do is follow the citations, whip out your calculator and your Excel sheet, and then, well, I'll see you in a week or so, because this was a major undertaking. Now, before we get into the ratings, it's very important to understand that Trenbolone is often investigated at various increasing dosages, while the reference standard of testosterone or methyltestosterone is only studied in a single dose. Based on the setup of these assays, there seem to be diminishing returns as the dose of Trenbolone increases compared to the exact same dose of the reference standards being testosterone or methyltestosterone. At lower dosages, Trenbolone has anabolic selectivity for the levator ani plus bulbocavernosus muscles in the pelvic floor, but no androgenic effects in the ventral prostate, seminal vesicles plus coagulating gland, Cowper's gland, or glans penis, insinuating selective androgen receptor modulating like effects. In many of these assays, the weight of these tissues ends up lower following Trenbolone treatment compared to the control orchirectomized castrated rodents, which is eerily similar results to the human clinical trials where Trenbolone was administered, showing that prostate volume comes down compared to the control groups. To be fair, these SARM-like effects are only observed with oral Trenbolone no ester administrations, and since oral Trenbolone isn't methylated, it has very poor oral bioavailability. This is why methyl testosterone should be compared to methyltrianolone, methyltren. I'll give you the spoiler alert. Methyltren wins by fatality, hands down. Oh, and by the way, as the dose of Trenbolone escalates upwards, the anabolic effects become less pronounced, but the androgenic effects become more and more and more, again, compared to the exact same dose of testosterone or methyltestosterone. So I went through all converted data and selected dosages where Trenbolone was significantly more anabolic than androgenic, looked up the average body weight of the strain of rats or mice used to investigate the androgenic or anabolic effects on various tissues, as many of these Hershberger bioassays went with set dosages, not dosages based on milligrams per kilograms of body weight of these mice or rats. So there might be some miscalculations here or there, but this is the best I can do. Still, I did my absolute best to calculate the milligram per kilogram dosages based on the average body weight of these rodents, and then ran these numbers through DoseCal to get the human equivalent dose based on body weight. Unfortunately, most of these results, are stemming from Trenbolone enanthate or Trenbolone no ester. So I did the conversion to Trenbolone acetate, which seems to be the most common ester used nowadays. And here are their results. If you're after a selective androgen receptor-like effect with an anabolic to androgenic dissociation of 3.7 to 8.8 to 1, being that the anabolic effect is between, let's say, 3.7 to 8.8 more pronounced than the androgenic effect, then based on the animal dose of 0.250 milligrams per kilograms body weight Tren no ester to 0.321 milligrams per kilogram body weight Trenbolone enanthate daily administered to rats subcutaneously. Let's say you're 100 kilograms, that would be a weekly intake between 25.76 milligrams to 32.83 milligrams total. Now, I know these numbers are highly dubious, but it's just to show that a low dose of Trenbolone based on body weight, right, the numbers are on the screen, might not yield an androgenic effect if you're worried about prostate or any of these other tissues that Trenbolone might potentiate action in. Now, if you have good memory, you can clearly see that the lower range of these dosages are about 3 times higher, where glucocorticoid receptor inhibition and the reduction of serum cortisol levels is already observed. And increasing the dosages beyond these numbers simply means that anabolic selectivity is lost and you get more pronounced androgenic side effects. So again, more scientific evidence, albeit dubiously extrapolated from animal models, that with Trenbolone, less is more. And more Tren just means more androgenic side effects. Now, I get it, running up to 40 milligrams Trenbolone acetate doesn't really sound very exciting if you're after phenomenal gains or pulling looking good on the beach. If you're a 100 kilo human being running, let's say 50 milligrams to 75 milligrams Trenbolone acetate weekly, then the anabolic to androgenic dissociation is 2 to 1. Basically, a low and effective dose of Trenbolone is about twice as anabolic as androgenic. So let's start pulling all of the Hershberger bioassay results together into a comprehensive rating system. When we dose match and injection round match using the reference standard of testosterone no ester propionate and enanthate comparing to Trenbolone no ester acetate and enanthate, then Trenbolone has an anabolic rating between 57.9 to 255.6 and an androgenic rating of 6.6 to 131.7 with a lipolytic rating of 211.1. Looks very promising, right? Let's say twice as anabolic as androgenic. And if we dose match and oral administration match a comparison between testosterone and Trenbolone, then unfortunately we don't have any results. But if you do the exact same thing for methyltestosterone and Trenbolone, then Trenbolone has an anabolic rating compared to methyltestosterone of only 3.3 and an androgenic rating of 0.2 to 10.8. And that's probably because the oral bioavailability of Trenbolone is so poor compared to methyltestosterone, which is 17-alpha alkylated, which prevents the metabolism, the breakdown in the liver following oral administration. If we injection match the Hershberger bioassays and forgo the dosages, comparing testosterone ester propionate and enanthate to Trenbolone ester acetate and enanthate, all right, discounting for all of the esters. Then the anabolic rating is between 20 to 752, and the androgenic rating is 3.5 to 414.9, with a lipolytic rating between 211.1 to 450.6. Man, powerful stuff. Which, to be fair, is actually very similar to the, let's say, imagined anabolic to androgenic rating by William Lebelin, listed in the Anabolics books. And if we pull everything together, similar to the Handbook of Experimental Pharmacology, volume 43, combining all of the available Hershberger Bioassays at that time, you see that if it's oral and injectable matched, regardless of ester, comparing a reference standard of testosterone to Trenbolone, that the anabolic rating is between 0.2 to 752, and the androgenic rating is 0 to 414.9, with a lipolytic rating similar to the previous results, 211 to 450.6. So yeah, this took me 3 days. If you didn't like this video yet, now is the time to do so. And if you didn't leave a comment yet, please leave a comment to fuel the algorithm. There's a study here performed by Owens et al., published on May 2007, titled The OECD Program to Validate the Rat Hershberger Bioassays to Screen Compounds for In Vivo Androgen and Anti-Androgen Responses, Phase 2 Dose Responses Studies. In this study, they investigated the variability of the Hershberger Bioassays amongst various laboratories worldwide. Amongst the androgens and anti-androgens examined, Trenbolone ester at dosages of 0.3, 1.5, 8, and 40 milligrams per kilogram of body weight daily was compared to methyl testosterone in 2 stages. Stage 1 was 0.05, 0.5, 5, and 50 milligrams per kilogram body weight daily, and stage 2 was 0.5, 2 milligrams, 10 milligrams, and 40 milligrams per kilogram of body weight daily, performed in 3 different laboratories according to the standardized Hershberger Bioassays of that time. Among the 3 laboratories, Trenbolone showed a dose-dependent increase in all 5 male sexual organs, but within the individual laboratories, there was a variation in changes to the ventral prostate between 29 to 51% in the results. Huge difference. Seminal vesicles plus coagulating gland between 31 to 37%, and the Cowper's gland between 22 to 44%, which might be accredited to variations in dissection and tissue handling. So, take it all with a grain of salt, because this shows that the Hershberger Bioassays, like I mentioned in the Debunking Anabolic to Androgenic video, are far, so far that it's in another galaxy from standardized. Right, but still, I spent 3 days on it, so do your due diligence and leave some comments, please. And now, the evidence-based detection times. The half-life of Trenbolone acetate is between 1 to 3 days, but it appears to be 15 days in cattle after intramuscular administrations, and 60 days in cattle following implantation in the posterior aspect of the ear. Trenbolone enanthate has a half-life between 4.5 to 10.5 days, but again, the acetate and enanthate half-life have been based on testosterone acetate and enanthate esters. Trenbolone hexahydrobenzocarbonate half-life is 8 days. At a dose of 0.04 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, Trenbolone orally, so that's no ester, it's detectable over 72 hours. Again, it's based on a single administration, but this study didn't last longer than 72 hours. 10 milligrams Trenbolone orally, no ester in a single administration, was detectable up to 6 days. 25 milligrams Trenbolone acetate orally was detectable up to 32 days following a single administration. 1.0 milligrams per 1 milliliter Trenbolone added to human urine, which is then dried, is detectable over 25 days, after which it's kind of degraded. 75 milligrams Trenbolone acetate intramuscularly administered to horses in a single administration was detectable over 5 days because the study didn't last any longer. And 140 milligrams Trenbolone acetate implants to cows based on a single implantation was detectable over 48 days. So let's stick with the reported detection times, because we can't really extrapolate or do anything with these studies. With Trenbolone acetate intramuscularly or enanthate intramuscularly or hexahydrobenzocarbonate intramuscularly, the reported detection time is 5 months. So if you're subject to drug testing, especially if it's random, stay away from the Trenbolone sandwich, because otherwise you will fail. And it finally brings us to the dosing protocol. I'm sure many of you guys used the timestamps to get to the dosing protocols, and you missed out on so many unique information that are presented in this video, including methods to mitigate Tren Cough, right? Maybe there's a timestamp for that too. Okay, for men, the sustainable and tolerable dose, even though I don't really agree with that, is 50 to 75 milligrams intramuscularly or subcutaneously, weekly, ideally split into daily microadministrations until blood work parameters become unmanageable. That's usually, let's say, 6 to 8 weeks. And the deleterious dose is over 75 milligrams weekly, but some guys can get away with 350 milligrams weekly, so that's 50 milligrams daily, without terrible side effects or alterations on their blood work parameters. So I would say that the deleterious dose is between 75 milligrams to 350 milligrams intramuscularly or subcutaneously, weekly, split into daily microadministrations for a maximum of, let's say, 6 to 8 weeks, again, or earlier if blood work parameters become unmanageable. And just like with so many other anabolic androgenic steroids, I feel that there's no sustainable and tolerable dose for women, so just stay away from it unless you compete at the highest level of bodybuilding. I have heard that female bodybuilding competitors run between 50 to 75 milligrams intramuscularly or subcutaneously, weekly, split into daily microadministrations for the last couple of weeks leading into the contest. And if you're still interested in running Trenbolone acetate, enanthate, or hexahydrobenzylcarbonate after watching the entirety of this video, I would suggest you look into these evidence-based ancillaries and over-the-counter supplements to keep yourself healthy while running Trenbolone, any kinds of ester. The details are on the screen because we already mentioned this in depth in the unique characteristics earlier in this video. One more study I want to highlight, and then we're done. Performed by Newman et al., published in 1976, a very long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, titled Pharmacological and Endocrinological Studies on Anabolic Agents. This is a very interesting take on Trenbolone acetate dosing by Newman. He proposed that since Trenbolone acetate is about 3 times as androgenic as testosterone propionate, not entirely sure which Hershberger Bioassay he's referring because the full publication I couldn't find. And since testosterone propionate is only active in dosages of 10 milligrams to 20 milligrams daily, he proposed a third of the dose at 3 milligrams to 5 milligrams Trenbolone acetate daily to initiate similar effects. And that will be 35 milligrams Trenbolone acetate weekly, which I can certainly get behind, albeit not entirely for the exact same reasoning, because we just debunked Trenbolone's androgenicity yet again. And that finally brings us to the end of this video. I have no idea how long this video is going to be, but it's probably well over an hour. It took me 5 days to record and over a month to prepare for, because I went down so many rabbit holes reviewing all of the scientific literature that's available on Trenbolone. And since there's no human studies available, I really looked for them far and wide. And since we're talking about Trenbolone here, I felt that it was only warranted to shoot an undisclosed amount of Trenbolone acetate subcutaneously on the first day of recording. That's 5 days ago. And since then, well, I think my chest hair grew about twice as long and I gained about 2 kilos on the scale while getting leaner in a caloric deficit, right? Here's your front double bicep. Let me know how many milligrams you think of Trenbolone acetate I took. I want to thank Dr. Dean St. March for helping me interpret all of these Hershberger Bioassays and assisting me to calculate new and improved, updated anabolic to androgenic ratings based on the molecular weight discounting for all of the esters, which was very inconsistent amongst the Hershberger Bioassays. I want to thank Alec Matrevsky for basically discovering how Trenbolone tans the skin by potentially increasing adrenocorticotropic hormone levels in the body and stimulating the melanocortin receptors. I want to thank Paul Barnett, Chase Irons, Derek More Dates, Kurt Havens, Dr. Todd Lee, Dr. Scott Stevenson, Dr. Adam Hotchkiss, Scott McNally, Andrew Barry, and Ken Skip Hill for leading me down all of these rabbit holes to make the most comprehensive guide to Trenbolone's scientific evidence on the YouTubes. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.